Wrapping up this very fun offseason series, looking at the best individual seasons by a Pacers player at any position, the best of the best. Who was it? When was it? Could this be surpassed in the future? Let's break it down today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are finishing up this offseason series. This was probably my most fun, for me, offseason series I've ever done in my August-September research projects that I want to share with you guys and help myself with. The best individual season in Indiana Pacers history. The first 5 episodes went position by position. We got to throw back to the past. I got to learn about player seasons I didn't know much about, like Michael Williams. I got to learn more about Detlef Schrempf, even though I already knew he was good. I got to learn more about Brad Miller, and maybe he wasn't as good as being an all-star. And it was all really informative for me. I got a ton of positive feedback, and today we're going to wrap it up with the best of the best. Does Tyrese Haliburton very recently make it? What is Reggie Miller's best season? Where does it land? Jermaine O'Neal has the highest accolade season. Is that the best? That is what we aim to find out today. I really appreciated all the feedback throughout this. You people who lived through these eras, right? I started watching basketball total probably 2003. I started really watching this is definitely my favorite sport. I want to watch all the time, 2009. So I'm a lot behind. So all of you from the Paul George era who helped me and said, no, you're wrong about this, or this guy was better than you're saying, or all that, thank you. Everybody who commented on ABA players, thank you. They were not a part of this exercise. It's just too different. But of course, the richest part of in team success Pacers history is in the ABA. So thank you all. And a lot of you have said that you really enjoyed this. So I love that too. Let's finish this up today. And I think there were 9 contenders for me for the top spot. If you wanted to go position by position to figure out how we got here, that's great. I'm going to tell you the 9 guys and the individual seasons in no particular order. In fact, what I probably should have done is say them in chronological order. Maybe I can do that really quick. And then I'll tell you who just missed my cut for being talked about in more detail today. The 9 seasons I think that are in contention for the best 5 seasons ever by a Pacers player are Reggie Miller in 1996-97, and then also Reggie Miller in 1997-98. Jermaine O'Neal in 2002-2003, and then also again in 2003-2004, and also in 2003-2004. Ron Artest's season made the cut for this particular exercise. Then we jump ahead to Paul George in 2013-14, and then again to Paul George in 2015-16. Victor Oladipo in 2017-18, and Tyrese Haliburton in 2023-24. Those are the 9 seasons that I think could be in the mix for the best 5 ever. Let me talk about a few omissions that these are the ones that I thought, I bet these ones will get the most reactions. 1, all Sabonis' best years. The team success wasn't there, and that's going to be an important tiebreaker in a lot of the stuff that you'll hear today. And he was this awesome hub that no one really played like, but it wasn't so dominant or so amazing from any accolade perspective or compared to the rest of the league or anything like that to make it in here. So his 2-year stretch from 2019 to 2021 was awesome. Had that team done something in the bubble postseason or been better, perhaps this could have turned better if they, had different coaching change fortunes in that year they're playing at home with no fans. Who knows how that could have gone, but does not make this. Danny Granger, his peak year, 2009, his all-star year, incredible scorer. I felt really bad not getting him in here. I almost did a top 10 to think about including him, but he wouldn't have been my 10th guy. It wasn't worth it to do that just to do that. But he was awesome. His season does not make the top 9 for me. A lot of Reggie Miller and Paul George seasons don't make the top 9 that I bet some of you are like, what? It probably should. And I'd say, yeah, maybe. I mean, there were lots of Reggie Miller. The hardest Reggie Miller seasons for me to leave out was 1995, that year that they were 1 game from the finals, which is a theme for Reggie Miller teams. And he was awesome in that regular season. 2000, when they did make the finals, and he got MVP votes. And then his highest scoring regular season in 1990. All those were tough omissions. And then Paul George, like, was making all defense teams and getting all NBA votes and like, hey, this guy's really good. Paul George is giving him respect app, and I didn't even include it. Like that's hard, but you have to pick their best years. Jalen Rose in 2000 was a tough personal omission. I still think he probably is the most underrated season in Pacers history, even though it's definitely not one of the best 9, 5, whatever number you want to use. In 2000, when he was awesome and won Most Improved Player, and then was awesome in the playoffs. And then again, I want to stress this more for people who don't know this or haven't listened to this whole series. If you can find clips, and I found several of these games are in full posted on YouTube, not all of them. Thank God the historic league pass was available during the pandemic so I could watch them all. If you watch start to finish every game of the 2000 NBA Finals, Pacers only trip to the finals, I think Jalen Rose was pretty clearly the best Pacers player in that series. He was very good and deserves a ton of praise for that. That was the biggest stage the Pacers have been on, and their best player was Jalen Rose. And then a lot of just like dudes that couldn't make the cut, but I want to say them in today's episode. Rick Smith's entire career, awesome. Doesn't get to the top 9. Detlef Schrempf's peak was awesome. The team wasn't good yet. And Roy Hibbert was very underrated, really changed the way I and a lot of NBA teams viewed the center position and its role defensively. Very good. I had him as the second best season by a center in 2012-13, but does not make the cut for this top 9. And a lot of guys in the pre-1980s or early 1980s cuts, Busey, Knight, just not here for me, even though they had, of course, tremendous seasons. So that gets us to the top 9, the guys I already said. And this was hard, again, to separate. I've already separated them when I did it, but now I have to separate them from other positions, which is harder to me because the stats impact different. You can't compare just like per game numbers or whatever, right? And it's easier to have a ton of win shares if you're a big, and it's easier to have it's easier to have a good PER if you're a big, and it's easier to have a good BPM if you're a guard, and it's easier to rack up win shares if you play a lot of minutes and guys played more before. So it's like you can't just use stats anyway, but you can't really use stats when you're comparing across positions and how much do you weigh defense and how much do you compare the quality of the league and players because they just keep getting better and better. It's a lot harder when you get rid of the positional barrier, especially at some of these positions were easy. These guys have the same role or expected to do the same things year over year, which was less so the case for other spots. So it was hard for me. So I had 2 guys that I'm going to cut. They made the top 9. I thought about for a second, should this be a top 5 season in Pacers history? But the first 2 cuts I had are the guys I will talk about first. Thankfully, they're 2 guys who only have 1 season on this list, so it's easy to do. The first guy I cut was Ron Artest in 2003, 2004. Wasn't even the best player on the team, right? Like that was kind of where I started. He was, again, tremendous this season. His only All-Star campaign, 3.5 BPM, 8 win shares, both very good numbers. That is the lowest win shares of anyone we'll talk about today. And that is the 3rd lowest BPM of anyone we'll talk about today. So advanced stats that we actually have for all these players, not great for him there. He was amazing, right? He was an incredible player. He was all defense first team, 1 defensive player of the year, all NBA 3rd team. Again, his only All-Star season to get to 18, 5, and 4 and be defensive player of the year. Phenomenal player. It was really hard to not have that as a top 5 season. I also think there's a little bit of an inertia Ron Artest pull down that I don't really need to explain. And so he was phenomenal. He could do a lot of things. If you remember, or if you've looked into the 7 games he had pre-brawl, that could have been maybe the best Pacers season ever. Obviously only played 7 games. It's not even close. So very good player, very good on-ball defender, very good team that made the conference finals. But that one, I felt like I just couldn't have it as high on this list. The other one I cut very quickly is a stretch. I'm talking like I spent hours on this, but within 30 minutes or so was Oladipo in 2017-18. If this was based on the best clutch players ever, him and Reggie would be dominating and we'd be talking about them for a lot longer. And that was like half of that Victor season was just so magical all the time. Every clutch game, he's making a big play. His impact stats were tremendous. He had the best steal rate in the league. He was a good defender. That was his, by far, to this day still even, by far, his best career season. I don't think he'll ever even sniff that. He got MVP votes. He made all defense first team. He made all NBA. He won most improved, which should have been the Pacers award at that point. WinShare says, BPM says that was the third most impactful season by a Pacers player ever. A lot of stats, especially impact stats, really tailored to the modern era. The reason for that being teams and players and everyone has learned what does and does not impact winning. And players have been and continually will be trained to play that way. They should. That's smart. That's part of how teams and players get better. And so the modern era is skewed by those kind of stats. In win shares on this exercise, this was the second lowest season, only ahead of our test, ironically. I swear, that's just coincidence, because the third lowest seasons actually rates very high on my ranking. But again, if you were around for this, you know what he was. The terrorizing defense, the magic of an unexpected team and player becoming a top 12, 13, maybe even lower than that player in the league. I mean, it was awesome. He was tremendous, but it just wasn't quite at the dominant level of some of these other guys for the whole campaign. And they lost in the first round, which really hurts as well. Playoff separations were important here. So those two guys, who are two of the three that only have one season on this list, were two of my first cuts. Awesome years. I think people will say that Ron season should be higher. Defensive Player of the Year. And I would say, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm under-indexing on that, but let's get to the top 7. The 2 toughest cuts and then the top 5. Let's keep it rolling here. Before we move on, I want to talk to you guys about the great folks over at Gametime, the best way to get tickets to the comedy events, sporting events, theater, whatever near you, whatever you're going to, get the tickets on Gametime. You can use the Gametime Picks feature to get those tickets even easier. They filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. If you're going to search through all those, you should still do it on Gametime because they have a ton of great features that will make that process awesome. The views from your seat feature. They have super deals. You can curate deals to make it easier to find the best price for yourself. They have the lowest price guarantee. They'll credit you if you find cheaper tickets in that section in a row for less somewhere else. Job loss protection, event cancellation protection. You can toggle the hidden fee so you can see what you're paying up front, which sucks at other places. It is awesome buying tickets on Gametime, where you take the guesswork out of buying tickets to whatever event you're going to. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. I use Gametime to get tickets to go out to New York Liberty. It was fantastic. You'll love the experience too. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's Gametime. We're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen, Locked On Women's Basketball. The Fever are the 6th seed. They have 20 wins. First 3 years I covered them, I think they won 17 games all 3 of those years combined. Whew. Riding a high. Caitlin Clark looks good. And Talia Goodman and I talked about it on Locked On Women's Basketball. Love chatting with Talia. It's our third one, I think, doing that together. Very fun. Fever playoffs start this coming weekend. So you might hear a couple plugs from me on that because I think everybody should enjoy it. It's been a blast. And Caitlin Clark is sensational. So let's keep it rocking. 7th spot. This is where it got really hard. You're splitting hairs, right? So everyone's going to have a case for something here. It was their best regular season, but not their best playoffs. Or they just didn't dominate the rest of the league, right? That was kind of the problem that I struggled with some of these guys. They were really good, but their league dominance wasn't as high as other guys. 7th spot for me, Paul George, 2016. Again, Paul George is a tough one because if you watch the Paul George era, a lot of his best seasons didn't feel as awesome from a team vibe perspective, and a lot of his worst seasons came when the team had like the greatest vibes and were awesome. 2015-16, Paul George was a fun one, kind of, because he came back from that injury where he only played 6 games and hit the ground running. 23 points per game. That was his highest at the time. He surpassed it the next year. But his defense was still at a high level. He made all defense second team that year. He was an all-star again. I think that was his 3rd one, maybe his 4th one. He was very good. The team was not. They lost the first round, and his efficiency dropped. That was his lowest shooting percentage from the field of his career outside of the 6 games the prior year at the time. So that was kind of a key separator to me, is the team not being as good and the playoff success not being there, because early Paul George teams were awesome in the playoffs and his efficiency wasn't there, which you could easily write off and say, hey, he just missed a whole year basically, with a major injury, franchise-changing injury. And that's true, but it still matters for the course of deciding if this is one of the best seasons in Pacers history. Very good for Paul George. Awesome season. One of his best in the Pacers ecosystem. I'd say his second best. But the lack of playoff success, the efficiency drop compared to the league, and his defense was awesome at its peak. We'll talk about his peak in a moment. It was still good at this time, but it wasn't what it used to be. I can't give this his best season nod, and I can't give it in the top 5, although I did think about it for a long time. People don't realize how good PG was at his peak. I think he only had one season outside of Indiana better than his peak 2 seasons with the Pacers. Phenomenal year, doesn't make the cut. The other really tough omission, the last season I did not include in my top 5. It was hard to cut this one. Was a Reggie Miller in 1996-97. Let me repeat the years. 1996-97. Reggie Miller that season, 21.6 points per game. The second best of his career, only after the 1990 season when he averaged almost 25 a game. Pacers weren't any good that year. 1996-97, Reggie Miller did that. He averaged 3.5 rebounds per game, which was, I believe, his third best. 3.4 assists per game, which was his second best. And that's the year he was chucking 42.7% from deep on 6.6 attempts per game. That was his career high. Top 3 in attempts per game. And of those guys was by far the best percentage. This was everybody knows Reggie Miller, awesome shooter, one of the best shooters ever. I just was reading a Jalen Rose interview from forever ago where he said Reggie Miller, off screen, best shooter. Larry Bird was his best catch and shoot guy. Steph, best movement shooter. Reggie Miller off screens, I believe. Either way, those were his 3 best. And that was, I believe, the first year they played together. It might have been the next season. Either way, that was when Reggie was just like an OMG level shooter. Here's the problem. Pacers didn't win around that year. In fact, they didn't make the playoffs. Really weird gap from all these conference finals years. They're battling with MJ. They're battling with the Magic. Wow, they're good. What happened? Whew, rough. 39-win season. Kind of a transformation of kind of team to team. Mark Jackson trade, right? Rick Smith's injury. They just didn't have the same quality of team. Derek McKee, I think, got hurt that year. I might be wrong about that. So they didn't have as good of a season. And the team success, not at Reggie's fault completely, but the playoffs are a big separator here. He had much better playoffs than that because he had no playoffs that year. Really phenomenal. I would say during the run where the Pacers were actually good, because his best scoring and individual season came early in 1990, and they made the playoffs that year, but they got swept in the first round. That wasn't one of his best seasons. Like everybody who was around then has told me that. But the team wasn't good. They didn't make the playoffs for a couple of years after that either. When they were good, he was awesome and had good playoffs. This year he was awesome, but did not have a good playoff. So 6th place for me. Had that team made a postseason, or he had been awesome in any way in the playoffs, like he was in the early 90s when he was a 27 and then 31 points per game score, this could have been it, but I couldn't do it. I just couldn't quite put it there. So that is my 4 guys who did not make my top 5. And now we can get to the top 5, which features 2 seasons from one guy and then 3 individual different seasons. And I'm going to get the only modern Pacer, the only still Pacer on the list in here now. My most controversial take, most likely, of this whole thing. 5th best season in Indiana Pacers franchise history. It just happened. It just happened. Tyrese Haliburton just did it. And the way that season went really is going to dissuade, I think, people from realizing it. Because from January to the end of the regular season, he was just like a pretty good player, right? He was a top 25 player in the NBA. From mid-October to early January, he was a top 5, 4, 3 player in the NBA. People were saying MVP conversation, and I said, no, probably not, but it's not unreasonable to say that. And people were legitimately talking. Podcasts of people that I listen to that have very well-respected opinions in NBA circles, who know this stuff, who routinely keep up with awards and would talk about MVP and All-NBA early in the season. All the time, no doubt. They weren't discussing it. Oh yeah, first team, Tyrese Haliburton. Yeah. Oh, he could be in the MVP mix. He was amazing in the in-season tournament run. That dude, it's not a full season. It doesn't count. But the stretch he had for the first 2.5 months of the season, 30 games. We're not talking about some small cupcake sample size of 6 or 5 or something stupid. We're talking about 30 games. He was that was probably the best stretch by a Pacers player ever. right, up till that injury that year. And so I think Tyrese Haliburton just had the best offensive, let me be clear, offensive season by a Pacer ever. His defense is not good, right? I'm not going to tell you it is. He wouldn't tell you it is. But his offensive season was phenomenal. And so to go back to the BPM thing I said earlier, where modern players get rewarded, his BPM this season, box plus minus, it's an all-in-one stat from Basketball Reference, and one of the best two publicly available advanced stats to me. That can be different for everyone. Your opinion of the best advanced stat should be the one that you think matches the reality of the players you watch, right? That should be it. One of the two best to me, the other one being EPM, 6.9 for Haliburton last year. That is the best by far of anyone we're talking about today. Only two other players were over 5, and that was Reggie Miller in 97, who we already talked about, didn't make the playoffs, and Oladipo in 18. And again, the modern players get a bump. He was phenomenal. One of the best offensive players in the league in a long time. And they made the conference finals too. Had they lost in the first, probably even in the second round, this wouldn't have made the top 5 for me. But to get that far, which by default is the second best result by a Pacers team ever, and be good, not exceptional, but good in the playoffs, 18.7 points and 8.2 assists per game in the postseason for Haliburton on 49, 38, 85 splits. It's pretty good. It's below what I'd expect from him in general, but pretty good. I put this 5th, and I think that will be my most controversial take of this list, is putting that above some of these Reggie seasons, above that Paul George and Ron season. But All-NBA third team is already a very high bar for a Pacers player. In fact, only one season ever has exceeded that from an accolades perspective. All-Star obviously is phenomenal. 2 years in a row of most improved player votes, all in-season tournament team, Eastern Conference Finals, the offensive output he had. I didn't even really think it was controversial in my own head. I know people will say no. This is recency bias. And I struggled with that all series long. If you listen to every episode, you heard me say proximity bias, absolutely a thing. Absolutely, especially for me, because I'm really around the current team, right? So I know all the information. I don't know all the information about these past guys, but I thought this was the right spot for Tyrese Haliburton. Was 5th. I think he belongs right now in the top 5. And if he gets better, could have seasons above this. He'd kick himself out of the top 5. But I think he could get above this, but he's not. Let's talk about the legendary players, the best seasons by a Pacers player of all time. You've already heard me talk about two of the guys, what order they belong, and one guy that has the best accolade season. Where does that actually land for the Pacers? We'll wrap up the series with one more segment. Before we get to that, we have to talk about FanDuel. You've heard us talk a ton about FanDuel on this podcast. They're America's #1 sportsbook. Well, guess what? We have something a little different for you, because right now through September 22nd, it's coming up. Keep that date in mind. All FanDuel customers can bet $5. That's it. Hop on there, bet $5, and they'll get a free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube and YouTube TV. You have a YouTube TV base plan. You'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. You just need a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel any time. 3 free weeks of YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com. $5 bet. Download America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen should be Locked On Kings, because 1, TJ Warren working out for them per reports from Sam Amick. 2, Matt George did an episode talking about where Domantas Sabonis is ranked or thought of perception-wise as a center. I continue to be astounded by the way he's talked about, even though I suppose I get what people are saying, but they're wrong. Domantas Sabonis is very good, and people are too low on him. And he's gotten better every year of his career for like 6 straight years. So we'll see what this year looks like for him, but he's very good. Matt George keeps talking about it. Check out Locked On Kings. Top 4 seasons. We have 4 left by a Pacers player ever. You know what the seasons are, because I said them all at the beginning, but you don't know the order. The 4 seasons are Jermaine O'Neal's peak, so 2002 to 2004 with those 2 seasons. Paul George's best year in 2013-14, and Reggie Miller in 1997-98. Number 4 for me, very hard to figure out where to rank this one. Jermaine O'Neal in 2002-2003. That was my second best power forward season. I probably should have done that the whole time. Ron Artest's 2004 season was my second best small forward season. Oladipo's 2018 season was my third best shooting guard season, behind the 2 Reggie seasons we'll get to today. Paul George in 16 I had behind on our tests ranking, so maybe I shouldn't have switched those for this, but when I dove in more, I decided that was what I wanted to do. Reggie Miller in 97 was my second best shooting guard season. Haliburton 24 was my best point guard season. Jermaine O'Neal 02-03, wow, that came out wrong, was my second best power forward season behind the other one of his that we'll get to in a moment. Let's talk about it. That was, to me, his best regular season. We have to stop and let you soak that in. 2002-2003 JL, 20.8 points per game. That was his career high, and obviously if it's career high, it was his Pacers high. 10.3 rebounds per game. That was his second best of his career, and of course with the Pacers. 2 assists per game was his best until post-brawl by quite a bit, and was ascending to a better defensive level. He won Most Improved Player of the year before, then got Most Improved Player votes again as he did that. Insanely good stats. The ascent as a defender really changed stuff for him and put him on the map. That team, though, didn't happen for him. They weren't bad. They won 48 games, but they lost in the first round to Boston. And let's be clear about that playoff series for Jermaine. Having trouble talking today. Jermaine O'Neal. He was amazing. 22.8 points, 17.5 boards per game. Pretty efficient. Not awesome, but the assists weren't there. You know, he wasn't the all-around impactful guy. He was just Jermaine O'Neal. And so insanely good regular season, very high statistical peak in the playoffs that year. All-star, All-NBA third team, very good player. Clearly proving to be like face of a very good team, franchise level kind of guy, team that could make the finals, which proof of concept would come to fruition very soon on that. He was awesome. Had they won the first round, this would probably be his best season to me, or at least his most acclaimed season. But it's second. And if I actually was watching at this time, not every game, obviously. I was super young, but like I know what's going on. And I watched him a lot. The first game I went to, they beat the Spurs, and he was tremendous. I think that this being where it is the right spot. I can't put it as his best season, even though a lot of indicators are like, hey, this is pretty good. Phenomenal talent. Win shares loved J.O. and said that was his most impactful season, even though I don't agree. Third best season for me was PG's peak. Paul George, 2013-14. This one is hard, and I had to talk about this when I did the small forwards episode because I think people enjoyed the year before that more, right? The vibes were fun. They almost made the finals. They're one game away. Wow, this old guard stud and this new guard stud and this team's guarding. And hell, Paul George is ascending for this team. He won Most Improved Player. He made all defense second team. This is great. He was better the next year. The vibes went screwy. The GQ shoot, the trade. Roy Hibbert's on the ground all the time all of a sudden after he was amazing the 2 seasons before. Again, Roy Hibbert was still good, but just like stuff kept popping up that was just weird and bad. And everybody knows what I'm talking about. I don't want to over-explain this. And I don't want to say that this is like a part of my evaluation. In fact, the opposite's true. I want to zoom out and say he was amazing with all that going on. Paul George that season, 2013-14. 21.7 points, his career high at the time per game, 6.8 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.9 steals, 42, 36, 86 splits. He finished 9th in MVP, which is very good. Any top 10 MVP season already gets you pretty high on this list. All-NBA third team, 7th in Defensive Player of the Year, All-Star again, obviously, and All-Defense first team. That was the separator for me for him. This was his defensive peak for the Pacers was that this time. So he was an awesome offensive talent all the time. He carried that into OKC. But he has only made one all-defense team since leaving the Pacers. That was that year he almost won MVP. I think he got third with OKC. But his defensive peak before that, and probably his defensive peak ever, was this 2013-14 season. He was tremendous on the end of the floor. Impact stats say that was his second best defensive season of his career. He had more defensive win shares that year than any other season of his career. His true shooting percentage at the time was a career high. He could finally get to the line a lot better. He was good in the playoffs that year. Again, the vibes were bad. That team made the conference finals, but it was tight. 22.6 points per game in the playoffs that year. That was his best ever at the time and his best for the Pacers when they were very good with him. His best efficiency in the playoffs that year. He averaged shot over 40% from three on pretty good volume. Was a good defender in the playoffs too. His best season. I don't need to keep giving you bullet points when you know, but I'm explaining to you why I have this third. It didn't feel awesome at the time because of expectations and a lot of stuff going on, but this was Paul George's peak with the Pacers, 2013-14. And to me, the third best season we've ever seen by a Pacers player. So the top two now are Reggie Miller in 1997-98 and Jermaine O'Neal in 03-04. What would be your separator? How would you decide this? Because what a lot of people have said and talked about, and they're right about this, they say, oh, it should be Jermaine O'Neal, right? 2003-2004, the Pacers were good. They were very good. Pacers made the conference finals that year. Don't ask me about the series. Don't ask anyone about that series. Woo. 69-65 final scores. Hideous games. Either way, a lot of people like that time. Jermaine O'Neal that year, 20.1 points, 10 boards, double-double. Insane. I think he was actually a few rebounds shy, and they're rounding up on the stats, but double-double average, basically, right? His efficiency dropped from the season before, but his assists went up, and his blocks went up. This was probably his best defensive season ever. His turnovers went down. His fouls went down. That's all awesome. He was unbelievable. I don't need to explain this to you. What separates this from a couple things throughout Pacers history, and even J.O.'s season prior, is one, that team had a deep playoff run. In fact, that was the most playoff games in one season Jermaine O'Neal played ever in 03-04. He played in 16 games and averaged 19.2 points and 9.1 boards per game. His efficiency wasn't there. It dropped off a bit from the regular season. Still very good, and his defense was very good throughout that playoffs too. And now, why people talk about this season still to this day is he made second team All-NBA, which is the highest finish by a Pacer ever. And in theory, if this was today, if that season happened today, he would have been first team All-NBA. He was only on second team because the two guys who finished ahead of him in MVP voting, which also, that's another reason this season is still talked about to this day. He finished third in MVP voting. That is the highest finish by a Pacer we've ever seen. The two guys ahead of him were Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett, KG1, and they played his position. So he can't be on first team in the front court. It was those two guys. So he made second team, but was considered a top 3 player in the league, right? That peak is crazy. That's that between MJ LeBron era where the league was looking for its face and like, hey, this O'Neal kid, 25, he's spunky, he's really good. Didn't pan out, and we all know why, but that was it. That was his year, and accolades wise, or at least whatever you want to call that, was maybe his best season ever. He was not very efficient, right? He was better in the regular season the year before. The playoffs are a key separator. He led the league in usage the following season, although he only played 44 games. That was his defensive peak, though, I think, in impact, and that's why I'm comfortable putting this here. But I can't put it as the best season. It had to be Reggie, right? It just had to be. And that, again, that's not actually something that weighted in my analysis, so I have to put a Reggie season first. But Reggie Miller, 1997-98, the best we've seen from a Pacers player ever on the floor. MVP votes, All-NBA third team, All-Star, 19.5 points per game, 42.9% from three. That was his best ever accuracy season shooting the ball from deep, from a player who was tremendous as a shooter all the time. He was obviously a major shooter, changed the league. Wesley Person that year took more threes than Reggie and at a higher percentage, which is nuts because 8 guys took more than 383 that season. Reggie was one. All of them shot under 40%. Most of them well under. John Starks, 32.7%, 32.1% for Isaiah Ryder, 35.1% for Tim Hardaway. These are good players. They're legends of the game. Reggie shot 42.9%. This was before shooting was cool. Reggie was cool. He was changing the game. The year before, very similar. It's like 5 guys who shoot as much as him, and they all suck accuracy-wise, except for Reggie. He's drilling them, right? Changing the game. Hard to guard that guy. No one knows what to do. So, first of all, his best shooting season from a guy who's known for the stat, right? 2-point percentage above 50%. That would be the last time that happened in his career till after the brawl. Very efficient from the field in general. Made stuff happen inside the arc. And for one of the last times, I would like people to chime in, but someone was talking to me about this. For one of the last times of his career, maybe the last time, he was a good defensive player, right? Or at least an adequate defensive player. He had some not great defensive seasons down the stretch, but he was good on defense that year. Actually got steals, didn't mess up that much on that end of the floor. So statistically, you'd point to some of his seasons over 20 points or even much over 20, although he was pretty much between 19 and 22 for like 8 years. You're not separating those by that much. But All-NBA third team, All-Star, MVP votes. That's the first time he ever got MVP votes. Already an awesome regular season. That's already in the top 9 seasons by a Pacer. Stop right there. But then, and I should add one more thing. People who are around and know, and the more I've watched, I agree, say this was the best Pacers team ever, this 1998 squad. They did not make the finals. 2000 team did. Some people say the best chance the Pacers had at a title was 2004. I suppose I agree with that. Yeah, that team compared to the rest of the league was probably the best Pacers team. But in terms of the best collection of talent together the Pacers have ever formed, 1997-98, I think that is the correct answer. They pushed MJ. They got to Game 7. They lost. MJ always won those. But Reggie was good in the playoffs, too. 1997-98, Reggie Miller played 16 playoff games, his third most he played in the playoffs, 19.9 points per game, shot 40% from deep, shot 42.6% from the field, had obviously several clutch moments as the Pacers got one game from the finals, was just awesome, was just absolutely phenomenal. Welcome Larry Bird to the mix. Welcome the Pacers to almost the finals, and congratulations. It could be no one else. Reggie Miller, 1997-98. The moments, the accolades, the team quality, the player quality for Reggie Miller. That is the best season he had for the Pacers, and that's the best season we've seen from a Pacers player ever. Let me know what I get wrong. Should J.O. be first because of the awards? Second team All-NBA is the best we've ever seen. Should I have put – I flip-flopped from a small forward episode. Should I have kept Ron ahead of PG, the second PG season? Should someone have been higher? Should someone else have been in this top 9 that I didn't say? Should someone have been on any of these lists I didn't say? Please. I have loved hearing from you. You being random person listening. All of you who have reached out have offered insight. No one's been a jerk about it, which has been awesome. What did I get wrong or right? And do you agree? Reggie Miller, 98, best we've ever seen from a Pacers player. And now I will leave you with this thought, because I already said it. I think Tyrese Haliburton had the best offensive season we've ever seen. Just now. It just happened. Can Tyrese Haliburton, how high can he get on this list? He has 5 years at least under contract to try to pass it. Can't wait to see it. And I can't wait for the Pacers season, which is coming soon. Looks like they're doing a little mini camp at Siakam's house, which is crazy. We have stuff coming next week to actually talk about the coming season with current events. So a few more shows between now and then. Tomorrow we'll be doing news. Lots of news to get to. Player rankings are coming out. Coaching staff changes are happening. There's so much we need to dive into, and we'll get to it all right here. Thursday, I want to talk about teams the Pacers play against, and specifically how they match up against them. Who do they match up best against? That's good. Who will they stink against? All that kind of stuff. Friday and Monday, we'll see. Thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you all for tuning in with me this whole series. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow.